Dad leaned back in the booth as if all the strength had drained from him. His eyes moved from the shattered glass on the floor to his hands, then finally to me. For a long moment he couldn't say a word. Behind us the TV kept playing. My own voice filled the diner, talking about creating jobs and investing in local communities. I wished someone would turn it off. Hearing myself describe a life my parents knew nothing about felt painfully wrong. 2 years, Mom whispered again, as if saying it twice might make it easier to believe. For 2 whole years, and you still let your daddy hand you a busgirl application tonight. I didn't know how to tell you, I admitted. Every time I tried, I pictured this exact moment. You both staring at me like I was a stranger. By then, Miss Odalis had quietly stepped away from her booth. She wasn't sitting with us, but she was close enough to hear. In a small town, news like this never stayed private for long. A few other customers had gathered nearby, and Delmar, who owned the diner and had known me since I was little, stood behind the counter with a dish towel in his hand, frozen as he watched the TV.Sable, he asked softly. You mean to tell me you didn't know your daughter owns that restaurant in Birmingham? The one my sister-in-law went to for her anniversary? Mom didn't even look at him. Her eyes never left mine. Why didn't you tell us? She asked. This time there was no confusion in her voice, only hurt. The quiet kind that comes from realizing you've been left out of someone you love's life. Weren't we your parents, Lucy? Whatever else happened, weren't we still your parents? Those words hit harder than anything else that night. He was right. I'd spent so much time worrying they'd think I was showing off or getting in over my head that I never stopped to imagine how they would feel learning the truth from a television hanging on a diner wall instead of from their own daughter. I was scared, I said. It sounds silly now, but I was. I kept thinking, what if everything falls apart? What if I tell you and 6 months later it's all gone? What if I end up back here looking for work again? I didn't want to celebrate something that might disappear. I needed to know it was real first. I needed to prove to myself that I could do it before I told the people who mattered most. Dad bent down and quietly gathered a few pieces of broken glass from the floor, placing them on a napkin just to keep his hands busy. Then he looked up at me. Solid, he said with a faint shake of his head. Baby, that man on the television just said you own 11 restaurants. 11, I confirmed. Well, 12 by spring. We're breaking ground on another restaurant in Tuscaloosa. Dad let out a long breath that sounded almost like a laugh, except there wasn't any humor in it, only disbelief. An hour ago, he said quietly, I was telling you to apply for a busgirl job. I know. I told you that you needed to start showing up somewhere. I know, Dad. He slowly shook his head and looked at the application lying on the table beside Mom's phone bill and the broken glass. 15 minutes earlier, that single sheet of paper had seemed so important. Now it looked completely out of place. Mom picked up the phone bill she had pushed toward me like a final judgment. She stared at it for a long moment before speaking. I canceled your phone plan, she said softly. I called the company myself. It's okay, I replied. Really? I can get another one tomorrow. No. I mean. She stopped and pressed her lips together. My mother had never been someone who apologized easily. In all my years, I couldn't remember hearing her simply say, I'm sorry. I was wrong to do that without asking what was really going on, she finally said. I saw the bill and I thought. She sighed. I don't even know what I thought. I believed you were sitting upstairs wasting your life. I was scared for you. She looked down at the bill again. And sometimes fear comes out sounding like anger. That was as close to an apology as my mother had ever given me, and I accepted it for what it was. By then, nearly everyone in the diner had drifted closer. A dozen people stood nearby pretending not to listen, while someone had turned the television even louder. My recorded voice continued talking about the scholarship program we'd created for employees' children who wanted to attend trade school. I heard Delmar tell another customer, I remember that girl coming in here after school with scraped knees asking for a chocolate milkshake. Look at her now. My face grew warm. Part of it was embarrassment. The other part was pride, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel because I'd spent so much time fearing this exact moment. Dad finally lifted his eyes from the broken glass and looked straight at me. You built all of this, he said, while living under our roof, eating at our table, letting us believe you weren't doing anything. I didn't build it alone, I answered. Mr. Voss gave me the opportunity. But yes, I did the work. And you didn't need our permission. No, sir. He nodded slowly. I could almost see his image of me changing right there in front of my eyes. I guess I owe you an apology too, he said. For that job application. You didn't know. Doesn't matter, he replied. I should have asked what you were working toward before I decided what you needed to be doing instead. Dad folded the napkin around the broken pieces of glass and set it aside. Then, almost hesitantly as if he wasn't sure he had the right, he reached across the table and took my hand. It reminded me of when I was little when he'd hold my hand while we crossed the church parking lot. I'm proud of you, Lucy, he said quietly. I don't know how to say it in a way that matches what you've accomplished, but I am. Mom didn't say much after that. Instead, she picked up the pitcher and quietly refilled my glass of sweet tea without asking if I wanted more. To anyone else, it was a small gesture. To me, it was her way of saying everything she couldn't put into words. The evening didn't end with perfect smiles and warm hugs. Real life rarely does. Over the next half hour, Mom asked question after question. About contracts, business partners, liability, and whether Aldrich Voss had a good lawyer protecting my interests. Once the shock wore off, her worry shifted into practical concerns. That was how she showed love. Dad mostly stayed quiet. Every time my face appeared on the television, he'd glance up, studying it as though he were trying to fit this successful businesswoman together with the daughter he thought he already knew. Before leaving, Miss Odalis stopped by our table, squeezed my shoulder and smiled. I always knew there was something special about you, she said. Delmar refused to let us pay for dinner. Dad argued with him for nearly 5 minutes, driven by nothing but pure Alabama stubbornness before finally giving in. On the drive home, Mom sat in the front passenger seat with the folded busgirl application tucked inside her purse. I never understood why she kept it. Halfway home, Dad looked at me through the rearview mirror. You gonna tell us the whole story someday? He asked. Properly this time. Not through a television hanging in Delmar's diner. I smiled. Sir. I'll tell you everything. And I did. Over the next several weeks, I told them the entire story, from the rainy afternoon in Selma when I delivered paperwork for my aunt, to meeting Aldrich Voss, to every long day, every risk, and every document I signed in Montgomery that changed my life. My parents accepted it little by little, the way people do when the truth is bigger than they expected. Eventually, Mom asked to visit the Birmingham restaurant. When we walked inside, the manager greeted me by name and several employees recognized her before I even introduced her. I watched something soften in her expression. At last, understanding had caught up with pride. Looking back, I realized fear of being misunderstood can cost more than the misunderstanding itself. I spent 2 years hiding my success because I worried my parents wouldn't believe in me. In doing so, I nearly let them push me toward a job that no longer belonged in my life, simply because I hadn't trusted them with the truth. Silence, even when it's meant to protect yourself, creates distance. Keeps the people who love you from seeing who you're becoming. My parents learned something too. Assuming the worst about someone you love, without asking a single question, can hurt the very person you're trying to protect. Honest conversations are uncomfortable. They're risky. Sometimes they happen before you're ready. But they're still better than letting someone else, or something as impersonal as a television screen, tell your story for you.